I stepped off the Greyhound with sand still in the creases of my boots, the scent of jet fuel clinging to my uniform like a ghost I couldn't shake, but none of that mattered the second my eyes landed on my town's faded welcome sign, cracked, weather-worn, and half-lit like it had given up trying to impress anyone years ago. I hadn't told Amanda I was coming home early, figured I'd knock her off her feet like in those videos where soldiers surprise their families at ball games and airport terminals. I imagined Jacob bursting through the front door, 14 years old and probably taller than me now, yelling, "Dad," as Amanda wrapped her arms around my neck like the years apart had only been minutes. But instead of cheers or tears, what I got was silence, a silence so thick it had weight, like someone pressing down on my chest with both hands as I stood on the front porch of the house I built with my bare hands, watching the porch light flicker overhead like it didn't recognize me anymore. The first thing that hit me wasn't a smell or a sound, it was the wrongness, the kind of gut-deep instinct you only develop after patrolling villages where every shadow could be a trap. The furniture behind the living room window wasn't ours. The welcome mat was gone. The hanging ferns Amanda used to water every Saturday morning had been replaced with a sleek planter holding fake succulents. I told myself it was exhaustion, that maybe Amanda had decided to redecorate, that maybe everything would make sense once I walked through the door and held her again. I turned the knob. It wasn't locked. That's when the hallway light came on, and out walked a shirtless man I had never seen before, tall, muscular, arrogant, like he belonged there more than I did. He didn't flinch, didn't ask who I was, didn't even reach for a shirt. He just stared at me, almost bored, before delivering the line that felt like it snapped a bone clean in my chest: "You need to leave. This house isn't yours anymore." I don't remember how long I stood there, could have been 10 seconds or 10 years, but my hand was still on the doorknob when Amanda appeared from behind him wearing a silk robe I'd bought her for our anniversary 3 years ago. Her face didn't show shock or shame or even guilt, just a thin-lipped smirk that told me she'd been rehearsing this moment in her head for months. "Oh," she said, her voice flat, like I was a cancelled appointment, "you're back already." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My ears were ringing, the kind of ring I hadn't heard since the IED took out our comms unit in Kandahar. But what I did hear, what I'll never forget, was what she said next, so casually it could have been a grocery list: "You don't live here anymore, Matthew. Please leave before I call the cops." That was the moment I knew. The war wasn't over. It had just followed me home. I didn't move when she said it. My boots, the same ones I'd marched through sand and blood with, felt glued to the hardwood that used to creak under Jacob's feet when he'd sneak downstairs for snacks after bedtime. The man beside her, still bare-chested, still smug, folded his arms like he owned the damn place, like I was the intruder in his home. Amanda didn't blink. Not once. Her voice didn't waver, didn't crack, didn't carry the weight of someone who had just shattered the life of a man who gave up nearly 2 years in a war zone thinking her love was the one thing waiting for him back home. I took a single step forward, just enough to see deeper into the house. The couch was new, the curtains were gone, the family portraits stripped from the walls like they'd never existed. Our wedding photo. The one we took under that ugly oak tree behind the church because the power went out mid-ceremony. Gone. And that's when I saw it, in the corner near the staircase, his boots. The kind you don't just leave at a friend's place. The kind that say, "I sleep here." I didn't yell. I didn't swing. God knows I've seen enough violence to know that once you open that door, there's no shutting it. Instead, I spoke low, calm, like I was briefing my squad before a mission, though my voice felt like it came from someone else entirely. I asked about Jacob. Where was he? Why hadn't he answered the letters I wrote, the video messages I recorded in a tent with sand blowing into the lens? Amanda's expression shifted for just a moment, just a flicker of something, maybe guilt or maybe just annoyance, and then she said it: "He got into trouble and left. He's not here anymore, Matthew. He hasn't been for a while." That's when it hit me harder than any roadside bomb ever could. Not only had she erased me from our home, she had somehow erased our son too. I looked from her to the man beside her, who had the nerve to smirk, as if this whole thing was just a soap opera rerun he'd seen 100 times before. I asked him, point blank, who the hell he was, and his answer still echoes in my skull. "Nick," he said. "I live here now. You're just the ghost." I stepped back. My body moved but my brain didn't. I wasn't in my house anymore, I was in a foreign country with familiar furniture. Every breath felt heavier than my rucksack back in Kandahar. Amanda told me to leave again, warned me she'd call the cops, like I was the trespasser, like I was the threat, not the man she'd clearly been screwing while I was out dodging mortar fire. She even had the gall to tell me I was making things harder than they had to be, like my pain was some kind of inconvenience to the fantasy she'd built while I was gone. So I turned around without another word and walked back into the night, carrying nothing but the clothes on my back and the splintered pieces of a life I thought was still mine. I sat alone in the Walmart parking lot that night with nothing but the buzz of sodium lights above me and the slow, rhythmic pounding of my heart, a sound that felt too loud in the silence, like it was echoing through a chest that no longer had purpose. The desert taught me how to survive in hostile territory, but nothing prepared me for the kind of battlefield where your own wife plants the landmines and your own home becomes enemy ground. My duffel bag was still in the truck bed, untouched, just like the welcome home banner Amanda never bothered to hang. I watched my own breath cloud the window as I leaned against the steering wheel, and for a moment, I genuinely wondered if maybe I had died overseas and this was hell, not flames and brimstone, but betrayal wrapped in silence, framed by the windows of a house you can no longer call yours. When the cold started to bite through my jacket, I realized I'd been sitting there for over 3 hours, unable to move, unable to cry, unable to think of a single person I could call, until one name clawed its way out of the fog: Richard. Richard Carmichael wasn't just a fellow soldier, he was the guy who once dragged me out of a collapsed building during a firefight, laughing as he did it, calling me a dumb bastard for taking cover behind a wall made of air. We hadn't talked in over a year, but I still had his number burned into my brain like coordinates etched on a dog tag. When I finally dialed it, my hand trembled so badly I could barely hold the phone to my ear. He picked up on the third ring with a voice like gravel and memory. "Holt. That really you, brother?" I couldn't answer right away. My throat locked up. When I finally did, I told him everything, not the war stuff, not the bullet scars or the nightmares, but the real pain, the kind of pain that turns your bones cold and makes you wonder if maybe staying deployed would have been easier. I told him about Amanda, about the man in my house, about Jacob being gone, and how I felt like a ghost who still had a pulse. He didn't interrupt. He didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "Damn, man." He just listened. Then, when I finished, he asked one question that lit something inside me I thought had burned out long ago: "You want to fight back?" Those words cracked something open inside me, something raw and ancient, something primal that had been buried under years of sacrifice and silence. I said yes. Not just because I wanted justice, but because I needed purpose, because war taught me that when you lose your mission, you lose yourself, and Amanda might have taken my house, my family, and every illusion I had about love, but I wasn't going to let her take me. Richard told me to meet him at a bar off I-74 just outside of town, a dive we used to haunt between deployments. He said we'd start there, start small, start smart, and most importantly, we'd start together. That night, for the first time in days, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt like I was loading my weapon. They say silence is golden, but that night, sitting across from Richard in the back corner of that dusty bar off I-74, the silence between his questions felt like loaded rounds chambered one after another, ready to fire. He didn't need to say it, he saw it in my eyes, the twitch in my jaw, the 1,000-yard stare that never really left. I wasn't looking for pity. I was looking for intel. I wanted to understand how my entire life had been gutted, rearranged, and reassembled around a lie while I was bleeding for a country that couldn't even give me back my wife. Richard pulled a folded manila envelope from his jacket and slid it across the table like a dealer laying down the last hand in a game of high-stakes poker. "Did a little digging," he muttered, eyes narrowed. "Amanda's been busy." I opened it with fingers that barely felt like mine, and what I saw inside didn't just sting, it burned. Bank statements. Property transfers. A notarized sale of our home, forged signature and all. And then, the photos, Amanda and Nick, not just at the house, but vacationing, eating at five-star restaurants, even walking out of Jacob's old high school with his transcripts in hand. What chilled me wasn't just the betrayal, but the timeline. Amanda had started draining our joint accounts 6 months after I deployed, moving money into her own name and another account in Nick's. She'd sold the house to herself and then gifted half to him, giving the illusion of a joint mortgage. My name, wiped clean from everything I had bled for, erased like I'd never existed. But the worst part wasn't the forged papers or the betrayal in ink. It was the confirmation that Jacob had been left to rot. Richard Source, a retired MP who still worked at the local juvenile detention center, told us Jacob had been picked up 3 months ago in a sting targeting gang recruitment near our old neighborhood. Amanda never mentioned it because, to her, our son wasn't an asset worth saving, just a liability she could offload while she played house with a man who had more abs than honor. I stared at the printouts, each word hitting harder than a bullet, and something inside me shifted, not just anger, but clarity, a cold, tactical kind of rage that didn't scream. It planned. That was the night I stopped being broken. That was the night I started writing my own mission orders. Richard leaned back, lit a cigarette despite the "no smoking" sign above us, and exhaled like a man who had seen too many wars to care about rules. "We take this slow, brother," he said, his voice low and deliberate, like every word was carved from steel. "You're not just going after a cheating wife, you're going after a woman who thinks she's untouchable. But here's the thing. No one's untouchable when they don't know they're being hunted." I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just nodded, folded the evidence back into the envelope, and slid it into my jacket. The war might have ended overseas, but back home, it had just begun. And this time, I wasn't carrying a rifle. I was carrying purpose. There's a kind of pain that doesn't show up on X-rays, a kind that drills into the marrow of your bones and makes you feel like the air itself is pressing in on your chest. That's what it felt like when I sat outside the juvenile facility staring through the windshield, knowing that on the other side of those cinderblock walls sat my son, my boy, the same kid I used to hoist onto my shoulders just to hear him laugh like life had no weight at all. Jacob Holt. 14 years old, athletic, smart as hell, quick-witted, and sensitive in that way boys try to hide once they start noticing how hard this world can be. And now. Now he was locked up in a place that reeked of regret and institutional bleach, surrounded by kids who probably hadn't seen daylight or love in months, all while his mother played house with her muscle-bound side piece, parading around in the home I bled to pay for, acting like her child didn't exist. The receptionist looked at me like I was a ghost when I gave my name and asked to see Jacob. "You his father?" she asked like it was a question no one had answered in a long time. "I used to be," I said, though I barely recognized my own voice. When they brought him out, it didn't feel real. He looked older, not taller, not stronger, but harder somehow. Not the kind of hard that comes from growth, but the kind that comes from being dropped and never picked back up. He wore a dull gray hoodie issued by the state, and his eyes that used to light up every time I came back from drill weekends, didn't even register surprise. He just sat across the scratched plastic table and stared, like he didn't know whether to speak or stay quiet in case this was all some trick his brain was playing. "You really here?" he asked, his voice lower than I remembered, raw like gravel scraped over pavement. "I'm here," I told him, and then the silence took over because there were too many things I wanted to say and not enough air in the world to say them all. I wanted to apologize. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the walls down and carry him out on my back like I did with wounded brothers in Kandahar, but instead, I asked the only question that mattered: why didn't you call me? And Jacob, with a bitterness I've never heard from my own blood, replied, Mom said you were gone for good. She said you'd moved on. She said you didn't want us anymore. Those words didn't just slice, they gutted me. Because betrayal from a wife, you can file under human weakness. But betrayal that makes your child believe you abandoned him? That's a wound that never scabs over. He told me everything in broken pieces, how Nick had moved in, how Amanda barely acknowledged him unless she needed something posted on social media to keep up the illusion of a perfect life, how the house was full of noise but somehow colder than ever. He fell in with the wrong crowd, chasing a version of family where at least somebody had his back, and ended up arrested during a raid on a trap house he didn't even know was being watched. Just silence, like I'd died somewhere overseas and no one bothered to tell him. I looked at my son, my boy who once believed I was indestructible, and I made him a promise, not the kind you carve into marble, but the kind you write in blood. I told him I was going to get him out. I told him I was going to bring him home. And this time, I wouldn't be the one leaving. I didn't tell Amanda I'd seen Jacob. I didn't knock on the door again or send a single message. I didn't scream, didn't rage, didn't break anything, because that's what she expected. No, I went quiet. And silence, when it comes from a man trained to survive in chaos, is far more terrifying than noise. While she posted filtered selfies with Nick and clinked wine glasses over charcuterie boards like a woman who believed the past was dead and buried, I was working in the shadows, collecting receipts, contacting lawyers, filing records, preparing my case like a man preparing for war. Because that's exactly what this was now, a war. But this time, my enemy wasn't draped in a flag or hiding in the hills. She wore a smile made of teeth and deception, sleeping under the same roof I built, wearing the same ring I gave her while our son sat behind concrete walls she never bothered to visit. She thought she had one. That was her first mistake. With Richard's help, I started documenting everything. The money she siphoned from our joint account. Traced. The forged signature on the property transfer. Under investigation. The photos of her and Nick at restaurants, bars, vacation spots, all time-stamped while she claimed to be working late or emotionally processing my deployment, safely backed up in 3 cloud accounts in a locked external drive. I even dug through public records and found she had listed herself as sole guardian of Jacob while I was deployed, lying through her teeth to the county in order to file taxes and receive benefits meant for military spouses of active servicemen. Every fraud she committed, every lie she told, I stacked them like dominoes, waiting for the moment I could knock the whole illusion flat. But I didn't want to just beat her in court. I wanted her to see it coming too late, to feel the weight of what she'd done after it started to crumble around her. No loud declarations. No warnings. Just quiet, methodical precision, the kind you only learn when your life depends on how still you can stay in the middle of chaos. While I built my case like a man assembling a weapon piece by piece, I also started rebuilding myself. I moved into a small rental on the edge of town, cheap and clean, with nothing but a mattress on the floor, a laptop, and a stack of notebooks filled with plans, dates, and evidence. I got a job at a construction site under a fake name, paid cash, worked long hours, and disappeared at night. No social media, no contact with old neighbors, nothing Amanda could trace. I was a ghost, and ghosts are only dangerous when you forget they're watching. Every morning, I woke up and stared at a photo of Jacob, the one I kept in my helmet during deployment, and whispered the same promise, I'm coming for you, son. I'm coming for everything. Amanda took my home, my trust, and almost took my son. But what she forgot, what they all forget, is that a man trained for war doesn't come back broken. He comes back different. And sometimes, he comes back hunting. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but standing outside that house, my house, the place where I once kissed Amanda goodnight under a roof I built with my bare, calloused hands, I realized something colder than steel or silence or desert wind, contempt. Not rage, not grief, those had burned off months ago, like the skin of a man walking through fire. No, what I felt now was surgical, measured, a blade honed over long nights and legal filings and recorded conversations with lawyers who nearly dropped their coffee cups when they read the pile of evidence I'd built. The confrontation wasn't about shouting. It wasn't about fists or broken glass. It was about control. So I knocked, once, sharp and calm, and waited as the door swung open with that familiar creak I'd always meant to oil, and there she stood, Amanda. Older. Thinner. Dressed like a woman who wanted to look like everything was still perfect. But I saw through it in a second. Her eyes flickered like a candle catching draft. "What are you doing here?" she asked, like I was the interruption and not the reckoning. I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, the way men do when they're not asking permission anymore. Nick was on the couch, shirtless again, like that was the only damn outfit he owned. His eyes widened when he saw me, then narrowed in that cocky, cornered animal way I'd come to expect from men who'd never had to fight for anything. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on Amanda. "You've been served," I said, setting the thick white envelope on the kitchen island, the same surface where we used to dice onions and drink cheap wine, the same one I now imagined stained with betrayal. She reached for it with a trembling hand, tried to keep her mouth from twitching as she read the first few lines. I watched the color drain from her face. She didn't understand how it had all slipped through her fingers, the lies, the money, the custody, the fraudulent tax claims, the forged signature on the property deed. She thought she'd buried me overseas and that was that. But ghosts don't stay buried. They dig back up. Nick tried to stand, chest puffed like a rooster. I glanced at him just once and said, calmly, "If you speak, I'll drag everything you've done with Amanda into court under your full name, in front of your employer, and every one of your family members. Sit down." Amanda tried to speak then, some stumbling, half-choked string of excuses wrapped in self-pity, but I raised a hand and she shut up like a puppet whose string had just snapped. "You didn't just betray a marriage," I told her, voice steady, tone cold enough to fog glass. "You abandoned our son. You let him rot while you played house and fed yourself this fantasy that I'd stay dead in the desert." I leaned in close enough for her to smell the dust and sweat that still clung to my jacket, and whispered, "You built this kingdom on sand, Amanda. And the tide just rolled in." I walked out then, not storming, not slamming, just gone, leaving behind nothing but paperwork and silence. And as the door clicked shut behind me, I didn't look back, because the battle was already over. She just didn't know it yet. The courtroom wasn't grand like in the movies, no marble columns or echoing gavel cracks, just a square room with bad lighting, stained carpet, and folding chairs that squeaked when anyone shifted. But to me, it was sacred ground, because it was here that truth was going to be carved out of lies like a knife through old bark, slow and clean. Amanda sat 2 tables down, dressed in muted colors and fake humility, her expression carefully arranged into something between confusion and sorrow. Nick wasn't there. Cowards like him never are when things get serious. She glanced at me once, briefly, like a tourist staring into a dark alley, but I didn't flinch. I sat straight, hands folded, suit pressed. My attorney, a former JAG officer with the glare of a man who'd argued with generals, laid the file thick with everything I had built, wire transfers, forged signatures, falsified taxes, and a trail of lies that even Amanda's overpriced family lawyer couldn't outrun. This wasn't just divorce. It was exposure. And the moment the judge read the first line aloud, I saw the blood drain from her face like someone had opened a valve. Her lawyer tried everything, deflection, pity, procedural objections, but truth doesn't need drama, just facts. I watched her squirm as the judge asked why she hadn't reported Jacob's arrest to me, why she withdrew money from a joint military account while I was overseas, why she forged my signature on a property transfer weeks after I was confirmed active duty. The answers came out strangled, fragmented, soaked in rehearsed tears and half-truths. I didn't look at her while she talked. I watched the judge. I watched the court clerk take notes. I watched the bailiff shift his weight near the wall. Everyone in that room heard the truth echo in that small, cramped space, and when the ruling came down, it landed like thunder. Full parental custody restored. All fraud-related assets frozen pending investigation. House deed reverted. Tax fraud formally referred to the DA's office for review. Amanda didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared at the floor, like someone realizing that the storm she thought had passed was actually just beginning. When we walked out of the courtroom, Richard was waiting by the elevator, leaning against the wall like he hadn't aged a day since the last firefight we survived together. "Well?" he asked, pushing off the wall with a half-smile. I didn't answer at first. I just handed him the final ruling, 4 pages stamped, signed, and sealed like a death certificate for everything Amanda thought she'd get away with. "It's over," I said, voice steady. "But it's not finished. Because the legal war may have ended, but the consequences were just taking shape. Amanda's accounts were locked, her reputation scorched, and her fantasy world shattered like a mirror dropped on concrete. She would lose the car, the home, the image, all of it stripped away, piece by humiliating piece. And the best part? I didn't need to lift a single hand. I let the truth do the hitting. All I had to do was survive long enough to deliver it. There's a silence that comes after battle, not the peaceful kind that wraps around you like a warm blanket, but the heavy, electric stillness that follows the final gunshot, where the dust hasn't yet settled, but the screaming has stopped. That's what it felt like in the weeks after the courtroom verdict. I didn't celebrate. I didn't drink. I didn't post cryptic quotes on Facebook or send smug texts. I moved in silence, again, but this time, I wasn't hiding. I was rebuilding. Jacob came home 2 days after the ruling. I met him outside the detention center, and the moment we locked eyes, something in both of us cracked, not in a way that shattered, but in a way that opened. We didn't hug right away. We stood there, breathing the same air for the first time in too long, and when he finally stepped forward and said, "You came through," I knew this wasn't just about bringing my son back home, this was about giving him a man to believe in again. I rented a small fixer-upper near the edge of town, nothing flashy, just a place with solid bones, a backyard that needed work, and a garage I could turn into something useful. Jacob and I painted the walls ourselves, patched the roof, and laid new flooring in the living room with our own hands. He didn't say much at first, still guarded, still nursing invisible bruises no court ruling could erase. But every time I handed him a tool instead of a lecture, every time I asked his opinion instead of barking orders, I watched him thaw. Slowly, quietly, like ice giving way to sunlight. We started cooking together, awful at first, laughably bad, but there was laughter, and that was more valuable than gold. At night, I'd find him on the couch with his homework open, headphones on, a pencil in his hand, the same hands that had once clenched into fists just to be heard in a world that had stopped listening. He started opening up, about the nights he slept on couches while Amanda partied, about Nick's cold indifference, about the moment he realized no one was coming to save him. "Until you did," he said one night, eyes wet but proud. "You didn't give up on me." Meanwhile, Amanda's fall was no longer quiet. The community that once smiled at her Instagram perfect life now whispered behind grocery store aisles. The news of the fraud referral reached her job, and like dominoes, everything began to collapse. Frozen accounts. Legal notices. Her social circle evaporated faster than spilled wine. And as for Nick, he disappeared the moment things got inconvenient, leaving her alone in a motel on the edge of town, clinging to a phone that no longer rang. I didn't chase her down. I didn't mock her. I didn't even respond to the pathetic apology email she sent me at 2:43 a.m. one night, probably drunk and panicking. I forwarded it to my attorney, then went back to helping my son hang drywall. Because this, the sound of a power drill, the smell of fresh paint, the quiet satisfaction of earning something back piece by piece, was what real life looked like. And the best revenge? It wasn't about taking everything from her. It was about showing her I could lose everything, and still come back stronger, with nothing but my son and a steady hand, and build a better world without her in it. I saw her one last time, purely by accident, if you believe in accidents. It was a gray Saturday morning, the kind that feels like the sky just gave up. Jacob and I were leaving the hardware store, loading up supplies for the next stage of our garage remodel, when I spotted her through the street window of a rundown cafe across the street. Amanda. Sitting alone. No makeup. No filters. No sparkle in her eyes. Her posture was slouched, her clothes rumpled, hair pulled back in a way that screamed she hadn't slept. Her phone sat on the table beside a cup of untouched coffee, screen dim, silent, just like her life had become. For a long time, I thought I'd feel satisfaction in that moment, maybe even joy. But standing there, watching her through the rain-streaked glass like a ghost she probably never expected to see again, I felt something else entirely: distance. Not pity. Not hatred. Just the realization that she wasn't a monster, not really, just a coward who thought love was disposable, and never imagined the cost of throwing away something she didn't build. I didn't go inside. I didn't say a word. I turned, loaded the last sheet of drywall into the truck, and when I slid behind the wheel, Jacob looked at me and said, "Was that her?" I nodded, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something I'll never forget, not because it was cruel, but because it was right. "Let her watch us leave." And so we did. I pulled onto the road and didn't look in the rearview mirror. That part of my life was gone, not like a wound, but like a dead limb you finally learned to live without. That night, we grilled steaks on the back porch, cracked open 2 sodas, and watched the sun set over the field behind our house. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about courtrooms or betrayal or motel cafes. We talked about the business I was starting, a renovation company for veterans, built by people who knew what it meant to rebuild from nothing. Jacob wanted to help with the logo. He even started learning CAD design online. For the first time in a long time, our house didn't echo with emptiness. It felt whole. Now when people ask me what happened, why my wife left, why I disappeared for a while, why I came back a different man, I just smile and tell them the truth. Some storms don't come to break you, they come to wash everything fake out of your life so you can start again clean. Amanda thought she could erase me. Thought I'd stay gone. But I came back stronger, smarter, and with a kind of clarity most men only find after losing everything. I didn't just get my son back. I got myself back. And as for her, she's living in the rearview mirror now, distant, fading, and shrinking by the mile. And the truth is, I hope she never forgets what she lost. Because I sure as hell never will.